Welcome back. Welcome back. Today we are taking a look at the Norway case. This is the final wrap up of everything. And we're going to cover the appeals, the Norway appeal, days 7 to 9, 7, 8, 9, and the closing argument. So we're going to do that all in one video here. We've been covering them day by day, and so let's get right into it. The Borgarting Courthouse of Appeal in Oslo, Norway. Thanks to Miss Usato for updating this on February 14th, and that's just yesterday. Now, if children are baptized too early, it's the parents' fault, says Anders Risdal. Who's Anders Risdal? Let's go back here, look at the thumbnail. There's Anders Risdal. He's the lawyer, and he's blaming it on the parents. So that's the first thing we're going to hear from him. Children are baptized too early, it's the parents' fault. Now, what about all the, that doesn't matter, all the movies and all the little kids' movies that teach them to get baptized young? No, Anders Risdal says it's the parents' fault. Oslo, Norway. The closing arguments for the appeal, days 7 to 9, the legal battle between Jehovah's Witness plaintiff and the Norwegian state, the defendant, intensified on day 7. On Wednesday, Tuesday, they took a break off the appeal hearing. And my little kitty cat doesn't like it either. It's really been agitated with all of this stuff. We're going to put her outside. This just really agitates the kitty cat.
It does.
And it may agitate you too, so the kitty's going to go for a walk. Bye-bye. Oh, we're back. Boy, is that ever quiet now. Okay, so the legal battle intensified. And day 7, on Wednesday, Tuesday, they took a break of the appeal hearing, started with the plaintiff's closing arguments. Warning. The plaintiff lawyer utters lies, dismisses evidence by key witnesses, describes them as hostile or disgruntled, and reframes key practices of the religious group to present them more favorably to the court. Therefore, a lot of his arguments may prove very triggering for some readers, particularly for those who have been directly impacted by the harmful practices. So let's take a look at this. Let's see if Risdal is going to live up to the thumbnail here. I'm a liar. I'm not a lawyer. I'm just a liar. Okay, so the day 7, the plaintiff's closing arguments. And the plaintiff's lawyer, Anders Risdal, in this picture is giving his closing arguments on February 12th. Okay, so we'll blow the screen up a little bit for you guys. There we go. Meager evidence from hostile witnesses, says Anders Risdal. February 12th, he says he started strongly opposing the state's argument and their witnesses. Risdal dismissed the accusations of negative social control, coercion, and children's rights violations as being based on meager evidence from hostile witnesses. He claimed the state's actions were an unjust attack on the religious freedom of all 12,000 Jehovah's Witnesses in Norway. And a group of former members from the multiple countries, including, and these are former members, ex-JW, so they all came from multiple countries, including Iceland, the US, the UK, Belgium, Denmark. They attended the hearing to support the ex-Jehovah's Witnesses, the former witnesses, testifying against the organization. And some described the atmosphere while Risdal gave his closing arguments in the courtroom as intimidating and tense. And the Jehovah's Witnesses who attended the appeal, they did it again. Listen to this, folks. The Jehovah's Witnesses who attended the appeal, they flooded the courtroom. They flooded the courtroom to dominate the seating. And this happened nearly every day of the appeal. What a shameful thing. You know, this is just a typical kindergarten type attitude. It is. It's a childlike attitude. Wow. So Risdale suggested that the personal bias of former members may have influenced their accounts. He employs a version of Darvo, deny, attack, reverse, victim, and offender, a common manipulation tactic in which the victim is portrayed as the aggressor. And that's what happens in the Jehovah's Witness religion, really. If you're a young girl or something and you come forth and say, this elder touched me, you're going to be treated as guilty because you don't have two witnesses. That's the way it was. They're trying to change that in their new elders book. But all of these members, these former members, they were under old elders book. They just brought out a new elders book and they changed a lot of stuff because they had to. So poorly investigated. Risdale begins his arguments by stating that this case is not about negative social control, which he believes he can prove thoroughly. And according to Risdale, the core issue in this case is religious practice. And he argues that Jehovah's Witnesses do not have a particularly frightening religion. For example, they do not believe in hell, but he fails to mention that they have different fears. You see, he throws this hell thing in, but then he fails to mention that these children have different fears. An imminent and real Armageddon is what these children are afraid of. But he doesn't mention that, right? He just says, well, for example, they don't believe in hell. Instead, he says they focus on end times and what happens after death. And Risdale asserts that Jehovah's Witnesses do not violate children's rights and repeats that they do not engage in negative social control. And he also finds it unreasonable that the state denies funding. Yeah. You see, this is all about the funding, guys. It's all about the funding to 12,000 members because of the complaints of just 2 or 3 dissatisfied individuals, conveniently ignoring the fact that more than 3 gave evidence in court earlier in the week and that those who did give evidence represent a much larger number. And furthermore, he claims that this case requires stringent standards of evidence. And he says we cannot convict 12,000 Jehovah's Witnesses because of a few had bad experiences. And I think it's important to note that if we look all over the earth, there's thousands upon thousands upon thousands, probably hundreds of thousands that have had bad experiences in this religion. And he argues that the case has been poorly investigated and that the state should have conducted an independent expert assessment of Jehovah's Witnesses. And he also insists that the term negative social control and psychological violence should not be used in the case, despite the evidence showing that this is exactly what Jehovah's Witnesses employ and retain membership with. So he doesn't like who the Jehovah's Witnesses are. So he has to lie about who they really are to make them a group that he likes. So that's what a lawyer does in court. Now, and this guy's never lived a Jehovah's Witness, never went to a kingdom hall. Maybe he did, but he's never lived the life of a Jehovah's Witness, so he has no clue. He just goes to court and listens to the lies that Jordan Peterson tells all his people to tell, and that's what they do. Now, it's the parents' fault. He compares Jehovah's Witness baptism to the Norwegian State's church confirmation of 15-year-olds, arguing that their baptism is no different, and membership is open to everyone and anyone can leave. Well, you can leave, but there's consequences, right? Now, Risdale claims that if children are baptized too early, it's the parents' fault, not Jehovah's Witnesses. And he argues that it's not the organization's responsibility if some members are overly zealous. So now he's trying to make it like some of the members are overly zealous with rules, but most aren't. He's trying to downplay this in court. And he says children must learn to think independently before they are baptized. Well, is he counseling the Jehovah's Witnesses from the platform here? Because it sure sounds like it to me, that he's telling the Jehovah's Witnesses how they need to be. He argues that it's not their response, it's the members. They're overly zealous. He's counseling you members, you JWs. You children, you must learn to think independently before you're baptized. Go play in the world. You don't need to, think independently, children. You see, that's not the way it is. in a Jehovah's Witness religion environment. It's not like that at all. The children are baptized early. They're pushed to be baptized early. They have cartoons, Sophia and Caleb, they're all baptized young. It's all about getting baptized young. It's all about preaching. It's all about a regiment lifestyle. You see, he doesn't understand any of that, but he can go to court and, he can tell all these lies based on the lies that Jordan Peterson and the group told. And he also references a former witness who testifies, John. And his story is found in an article of Day 6, who describes him as a thoughtful but angry man and states that his father, not Jehovah's Witnesses, was the real problem. Pointing the finger at others to detract from one's own mistakes is a cheap and shallow defense, Mr. Risdell. Cheap and shallow. Risdell reiterates that testimonies from ex-members have little value. He cites Italian sociologist of religion. See, they wanted to bring this Massimo intervene in to this court case, and the state denied it, but he brought his crap in anyways as a source. So I don't know, why wouldn't the state say, objection, we already denied this crap? See, this Massimo intervene, he's an apologist for Scientology. He has a big part in the Vampire Association. This guy's a Catholic lawyer, real estate lawyer. He's into real estate. He's from Italy, from the Vatican. Now, it should be noted that Intervene has not and does not interact with former members of Jehovah's Witnesses. His work is heavily biased toward cults. He has no data or evidence for the claim that former members' testimony is of little value. And incidentally, that was an unfounded claim made by Brian Wilson in 1970, who wrote it in a paper without providing any references or supporting data. Okay, well, let's carry on. Risdell claims that Jehovah's Witnesses are very liberal, but that some parents have made mistakes and being too strict. Is that true or false? You tell me. Jehovah's Witnesses are liberal, but some parents have made mistakes and are too strict. Is that true? I would say the elders are the strictest with their kids, and they set the example for the congregation, and most of the congregation tries to live up to be like these elders and their kids. That's what I've seen. Now, Risdell, he provides no evidence to support his claim. What's he talking about? How many is it? He talks about some parents. Is it 6? 60? Is it 600 or is it 6,000? Like, he's just shooting off, just throwing out stuff. No evidence. This is court, guys. Remember, he is, well, let's pull this back up. He's a liar. He's not really a lawyer, he's a liar. Okay, we always have to keep that in mind, folks. Okay, so he compares this to doping in sports. That's what he compares this to. Saying that just because some athletes use dope doesn't mean everyone does. Like, where does he get these illustrations from? And he says, regarding Jehovah's Witness publications, he argues they are not legal texts. Really? Their publications aren't legal texts? That's legal for them. If you're a Jehovah's Witness, Watchtower is God. That's a fact. That's a fact. You tell me in the audience, if you're JW, Watchtower is God. That's like coming from God. And all the way through the 30 years I was in it, well, if it's in the Watchtower, we'd talk about things. Well, what about this? What about? Well, if it's not in the Watchtower, then it didn't exist, or it didn't happen, or you're not telling it the way it is. The Watchtower says it this way, so that's the way it is. You see, Watchtower's God to a brainwashed Jehovah's Witness. I was one. And I can say that as a matter of fact. I was one for 30 years. Watchtower is God. The indoctrination is steep. It's deep. And usually it happens when you're young and your mind's moldable. And that's when they get you. And that's when they get their own kids. So He says regarding Jehovah's Witness publications are not legal texts. That's a lie. They are, to them they are. And that two people can read the exact text and interpret it entirely different. No, you can't. There's an elder's book that interprets this all too. Secret Elders book. And he also claims that there is no evidence that elders act as police, and that's BS, because they do. They're the judicial, the lawyers, they're everything. You can't go to a lawyer for things if you have an issue with your brother or sister. You have to go to the elders, and they have to judiciate it. You know, if your brother or your sister did something, slandered you or something like that, you wanted to sue them, right? You can't do that. Not in that religion. You cannot take your brother and sister to court. And he also claims that there is no evidence that elders act as police, force, or seek out ex-members. They do seek out ex-members. So in short, Risdale provides no evidence for his claims, but is quick to point out that there's no evidence for some of the defendant's claims. And he repeats that Jehovah's Witnesses are the ones being violated. You know, they always want to be the ones. We're the ones being martyred. Look at us. Nothing has changed. This has been going on for 100 years. And he says, he repeats that Jehovah's Witnesses are the ones being violated, and they now fear being portrayed as a dubious sect. You are what you are. Like you reap what you sow. Jehovah's Witnesses. If you sow things that a dubious sect would do, then you earn that title. So we can't help that. You know, once we get out. That's why a lot of us have left, because we did not want to be part of a dubious sect that hides pedophiles and shreds records of them, hides them within the sect. You know, this court case didn't even talk about stuff like that. It just talked about the harm that shunning does to children. So he goes on to mention that the loss of their right to perform marriage is a violation. Additionally, he argues that they could theoretically lose clergy confidentiality rights. Theoretically lose clergy. Like, do they want to be Catholic priests? It looks like Jehovah's Witnesses want to be Catholic priests. Every, court thing that I'm seeing, this is what they're going for. Their loss of clergy rights. It's nice to know that elders are clergy. They're all the same. They're all part of Babylon the Great. You can lump it up that way, right? That's what they want. They want to be able to hide this stuff. And it goes on to say, similar to those granted the Norwegian priests. So, they want to be just like the priests. Where's this we're separate from the world thing? It's not in here. He further claims that parents' rights to raise their children within their religion or philosophy are being violated. He asserts that another violation is requiring Jehovah's Witnesses to change their biblical stance on exclusion to receive state funding. Really? A violation. So, in other words, he's saying, we want to violate every human out there that leaves our organization according to the human rights. We want to violate those humans. We want to kick them out, shun them, disfellowship them. But you guys are the ones at fault for violating us and not giving us our money, our state grants. He's coming out and saying that right here. It's all about state funding. Okay, well, let's carry on. Their arguments. Here he is, Risdale. What a happy guy. Lunchtime. He's going to give his closing arguments. After the break, the topic shifts precisely to exclusion. Risdale describes it as a loving arrangement, exclusion, and he claims that exclusion is not a punishment, but a therapeutic measure. Wow. He must be a psychologist. Family relationships, he argues, remain the same after exclusion. Really? Well, I could argue that. I could argue that. And so can hundreds of thousands of others. Now, this is a blatant lie. Thank you, Miss Usato, for throwing that in. We're going to go back. This is a blatant lie. He's a liar. He's not a lawyer when he tells stuff like this. He continues his lie by saying that it's up to each Jehovah's Witnesses to decide how much or how little to contact they want with the disfellowship person. That's how he continues his lie. And lying further, he insists that elders do not give any instruction or advice regarding contact. That's what he says. He says elders don't, right here, he insists elders do not give any instruction or advice regarding disfellowshipping. What a lie. Okay, just personal circumstances. But he doesn't stop with just his lies there. He further claims a high degree of normalcy in family relationships with disfellowship members. He argues that the complex personal circumstances and former members' mental health issues. Oh, he's a psychologist, but we all know he's a liar. He's not a lawyer, he's a liar. And he's talking about mental health issues are the real reasons people experience social rejection. He provides no evidence for his ludicrous claim. This is just it. Risdell then works to discredit the testimonies of former members, witness by witness. He dismisses the state's claim of negative social control and child rights violations as based on meager evidence from hostile witnesses. And he argues that testimonies from former members are unreliable and do not justify stripping the organization of its registration and state funding. And he forgot about you reap what you sow, Jehovah's Witnesses. He forgot about that principle that's in the Bible. You reap what you sow. And he provides no evidence as to why the testimony of former members is unreliable. Indeed, he could not provide even a single example of any of the testimonies given by the former members was demonstrably false. You see, these are members that have experienced this. And how can you discredit a person who gets up and tells their experience? Well, this is what he's trying to do. So why are their testimonies unreliable? He had no reason. Like, he just said they're unreliable. As if he's God, I guess. Now, he summarized by claiming that his client is being discriminated, the JW org, and against because of their exclusion policy. And he argues that the state is both interfering and violating Jehovah's Witness rights, and that the government is mistreating them and stating that the law should apply equally to all. Oh, I'm so sorry. I feel so sorry. Well, anyways, I got over that quick. Day 8, Plaintiff's final comments and Norway's closing arguments. He's got his coat on and his pink tie on. The girls look pretty serious. Let's see what happens. From left to right, Anders, Risdell, Kristen, Hollis, Arvik, and Liv Inger, Joan Gabrielson. Wow, a lot of names in each name. Should individual religious freedom and children's rights take precedence over the religious freedom and faith community when they conflict? That's the state's argument. February 13th, Watchtower's lawyer Risdell concludes his arguments on day 8, emphasizing that no other country except Russia has gone as far as Norway in treating Jehovah's Witness differently. And that's false. I just read the Czech Republic. They're looking at stripping them, like Russia. And in Russia, they took their property and all that, and they took away their rights to even worship. But Norway's not doing that. They're just taking away the grant, for crying out loud. And they make it all look like Russia, and it's not. So anyways, one would nearly think that Norway was banning the group, but this is not the case. They continue to enjoy religious freedom. They have only lost their registration for funding. That's it, which includes a loss of performing legal marriages. Risdell's last argument is that the state had failed to prove the existence of any form of negative social control. BS, they have only demonstrated a Bible-based social distancing. What is Bible-based social distancing? Whether it's Bible-based or not, the social distancing is the crux of the issue. Total disconnection from family and friends. You know, they sure like to play with words, don't they? But this, folks, shows you step by step how lawyers work. Lawyers are liars. They're not lawyers. They're just good liars. This guy's not even a good liar because it's so easy to see his lies. You see, a good liar, you could almost believe the lie, but this guy is a poor liar because his lies are just blatant wrong. It's just so easy to see it for anybody. Now, Norway's turn for the closing arguments. The government attorney, Liv Gabrielsen, began her argument by representing the Ministry of Children and Families. She rejected Risdell's claim that the state was attacking religious freedom. Freedom of religion is something the state values highly, and it extends far. But the rights of a religious community under it are not unlimited. And Gabrielsen stressed that the case is not about individual members, but about the organization as a whole. And she posed the key question, should individual religious freedom and children's rights take precedence over religious freedom of a faith community when they conflict? And she argued that the religious communities must be limited in their activities and that the state's decision to revoke funding and registration was an attempt to balance individual rights and religious rights. And Norway's closing arguments continue. Children can be forced to appear before these communities where elder men decide their fate in the congregation. In the afternoon, okay, got that frog out of my throat. In the afternoon, Gabrielsen laid out several key arguments about why the state had the legal right to revoke Jehovah's Witness state funding and the official registration. Her argument centered on the claim that the religious group's practices violate children's rights and that the social consequences of leaving the faith amount to coercion. Yeah, you don't need a lot of words just to tell it the way it is. There's just a few words, tells it the way it is. Jehovah's Witnesses prevent members from leaving. One of the state's central arguments is that Jehovah's Witnesses create significant barriers to leaving the faith, effectively coercing members to remain. And Gabrielsen argued that this is just not about personal religious beliefs, but about uninstitutionalized practices. Yes, institutionalized practices is what this is. This is like prison kind of stuff, institutionalized practices that make it extremely difficult for individuals, especially children, to exercise their right to religious freedom. There goes a limit to what religious communities can do, Gabrielsen stated in court, defending the decision to strip the group of its state benefits. And the state contends that those who attempt to leave the religion face severe social and emotional consequences, making their choice to stay less than voluntary. And this is a violation of religious freedom, as it restricts individuals, particularly minors, from freely choosing their faith or lack thereof. And children may face isolation. Another major concern raised by the state is that Jehovah's Witnesses' doctrine on disfellowshipping exclusion can lead to social isolation of children. And if a child fails to adhere to the religion's strict rules, they risk being shunned by their family and the community. And the state's lawyer suggested that this practice could amount to psychological harm and deprive the children of safe and supportive upbringing. And that's a fact. Psychological harm, and it does. And there's 50 more, I think they brought up a 50% higher rate of suicide with ex-Jehovah's Witnesses. Now, for example, Jehovah's Witnesses strictly prohibit association with those who leave the faith, including family members. And this can have devastating effects on children who might be cut off from relatives and friends if they question or reject the group's teachings. And the government argues that this isn't just a religious practice, but a systematic method of control that violates children's fundamental rights to social development and emotional well-being. Now, I said 50%. It's a 50% of the ex-members contemplated suicide. That's what it was. And I think 10% of ex-Jehovah's Witnesses is higher, and that's done by a U.S. study. We covered that on a video a while ago. But there's a 10% rate that there's higher suicides, but we learned in this court case that 50% of the ex-Jehovah's Witnesses contemplated suicide. And that's because of this social control. They're all alone. They have no family support. They're cut off. Now, children may be subjected to judicial committees. It's another thing. There's no women, remember. It's all men. 3 elders, and they look like big bullies in front of these little kids. Now, a particularly concerning issue for the state is the role of judicial committees, which are internal disciplinary panels led by congregation elders. And these committees assess whether a member, sometimes even a minor, should be disfellowshipped. And Gabrielson, the state's lawyer, argued that such quasi-judicial proceedings are inappropriate, and they're trying to get penitent clergy privilege for these 3 elders, or these elders in these groups. Anyways, especially for children. I can't imagine any other religion doing stuff like this, but this religion does it and gets away with it. So she argued that they have this quasi-judicial proceedings that are inappropriate, especially for children, who may be forced to defend themselves in front of religious leaders in highly sensitive matters. And the state maintains that children can be forced to appear before these committees where elders decide their fate in the congregation. Now, this could expose children to mental distress, intimidation, and undue burden of guilt at an age when they are particularly vulnerable. Okay, so now we're going to get into the legal basis for deregistration and loss of funding. The state lawyer emphasized that the state's actions were not arbitrary, but were backed by Norway's Religious Communities Act. And she referenced 4 and 6 of the law, which allows governments to deny funding and registration to any religious group found to be violating human rights, particularly those of children. And number 4 of the Religious Community Act states a religious or belief community can be denied registration, or registration can be withdrawn if 1 or more of the conditions for denying funding in 6 are met. And number 6 of the Religious Communities Act further clarifies if a religion or a belief community or individual acting on behalf violates children's rights, the community may be denied funding or have its funding reduced. So the state's lawyer argued that Jehovah's Witnesses meet these criteria because of their practices of disfellowshipping, social shunning, coercive restriction on members and leaving, and the involvement of minors in judicial meetings procedures. And because of these practices amount to systematic, intentional, and ongoing violations of children's rights, Gabrielson maintained that the government had both the right and the duty to intervene. Okay, well, hang in there. We're at day 9, the last day of the appeal. And what do we have? We have a picture of Rizdal. He has a half smile. So the final day, the purpose of the sentencing committee is to lead people back to a healthy relationship with God. And this should be done in a friendly manner. This is a board member of the Jehovah's Witness. Care Setterhaw. February 14th, the final day of the court proceedings in the appeal case between Jehovah's Witness and the Norwegian state took an intense turn as a religious community's lawyer, Anders Stray Rizdal, launched a sharp critique against the state's legal team. Rizdal filed a formal objection against the state for claiming that elders asked for explicit details in a judicial committee, and Rizdal then accused the government of introducing arguments that the religious group had not been allowed to address during the trial. And this puts the facts of the case in a new position as we deserve evidence and a new mention, and this comes too late, Rizdal asserted, prompting the court to take a break for the state's lawyer to consider their position. However, upon returning, the government's legal team maintained that their argument concerning allegedly intrusive and uncomfortable interrogations of minors was part of the broader case framework. We dispute that such conversations take place, Rizdal stated firmly. See, Rizdal's never been in an elders meeting with kids, so he doesn't know. Apparent protest procedural fairness. Rizdal proposed a formal protest, but the court allowed Kerr Soderhaug, an elder in the organization, to explain. Soderhaug explained that the religious community's internal guidance does not encourage asking more detailed questions than necessary. Soderhaug defends the religious practice. The purpose of the Judicial Committee is to lead people back to a healthy relationship with God, and this should be done in a friendly manner. Like Risdell before him, he attempts to deceive the court when he says the process is not being monitored in an oppressive way. It is monitored, and it is oppressive for those who are being tracked down and given an ultimatum if they do not attend the Judicial Committee meeting, especially when they do not want to meet. So Judge Horgan Mon challenged this position by referencing witness testimonies that described highly detailed and distressing interrogations. And he says, could it be that someone has experienced very detailed and unpleasant sentencing committees? The judge asked. It has never been in line with the guidance the elders had received, Soderhaug responded, maintaining that he had no knowledge of such cases. And of all the lies uttered over the 2 weeks of the appeal, this is the greatest one. Elders are directed to find out if porneia has been committed. Elders are directed to find out if porneia is being committed. So how are they to do that if they are not asking invasive questions? So the whole judicial process that involves sexual activity is set up to be intensely invasive. So there it is. Wouldn't that be invasive if 3 elders came at you, you're a young girl, wanting details on porneia? Well, the plaintiff filed, this is the Risdell lawyer, 3.3 MN NOK. So he charged $296,000 for his work in this court case, I guess. It's a lot of money, eh? Wonder who's going to have to pay that. Well, Jehovah's Witnesses intervened by Vartland. This is Ermelian Jacobson, a wife of a circuit overseer, in a piece submitted by Jehovah's Witnesses to Vartland. And why is the government relying on a very limited number of disgruntled former Jehovah's Witnesses? So this lady says, who has never been disfellowshipped, has never tried to leave, had no experience of sitting before 3 men in a judicial committee to be questioned about her sexual activity with a third party. This lady is getting involved. She's never been disfellowshipped, wife of a seal, never tried to leave, never had to sit in front of men in a judicial meeting, talk about her sexual experience of fornication or any of that. Well, in a Vartland article written by and submitted by Jehovah's Witness leader and leadership in Norway, why has no one asked us? This lady, a member of the JW's, wife of a CO, argues that the Norwegian government has unfairly characterized the religious community as practicing negative social control without consulting its current members. And while her perspective is sincere, it ignores key issues that underpin the state's concerns and experiences of those who have left the faith. This is noteworthy as Mrs. Jacobson has never been disfellowshipped, never tried to disassociate. She's never had to sit in front of 3 men to discuss intimate details of her sexual activity. Jacobson insists, did I experience negative social control? Not at all. However, her experience does not necessarily represent all Jehovah's Witnesses, particularly those who have left the organization. The government's case is built on testimonies from former members, many of whom describe coercion, psychological stress, distress, and social isolation after leaving. And Ermelian, dismissing their voices as merely a very limited number of disgruntled former Jehovah's Witnesses, is to ignore the actual harm that has been documented. That is the offense. It would be like Jehovah's Witnesses ignoring the Holocaust. Be the same thing. Which they don't. They claim that they're part of the whole Holocaust. But you see, it'd be like that to ignore what's going on with ex-members because it's a Holocaust to them. Now, she defends the practice of disfellowshipping, this circuit overseer's wife, where members who violate religious principles are expelled and shunned, by comparing it to receiving a red card in a football. I don't know where that comes from. However, this analogy oversimplifies a deeply personal and often traumatic experience. A football player can return to the game after serving a penalty, but a disfellowshipped Jehovah's Witness often loses their entire social network, including the family ties. And that level of enforced isolation is why the state deems the practice a form of psychological violence. Okay, so you're talking about a red card in soccer. We call it soccer, not football. Football, we throw them around. Soccer, you kick. You get a red card in soccer. I just got informed. Thanks, good wife. Okay, furthermore, Jacobson claims the elders in my congregation are my friends, not police or bosses. Well, she's married to a SEAL elder. Come on. Be like an elder's wife. While that may be true for her, the evidence presented in court suggests that elders enforce strict rules, discipline, particularly in matters of morality, and sometimes involving intrusive questioning of minors. And her argument that the Bible does not provide a long list of rules, but rather principles, often also conflicts with the reality that Jehovah's Witnesses follow rigid rules, interpretations of the doctrine, that leave little or no room for individual discretion. And Jacobson then suggests that she is now facing negative social control from the state, stating to me, "It seems like the state wants to decide who I should be with." Oh, look at me. We knew this was going to happen. The Jehovah's Witnesses are going to say, "Look at me. Look at what this has done to me." It just makes me sick. Okay, but the government is not dictating her personal relationships. It's simply refusing money. It's refusing to fund this cult. That's all the government's saying. We're not going to fund cults that abuse children. Simple as that. We really don't care how you feel, Circuit Overseer's wife. And recognize a religious group that enforces social exclusion in ways that violate children's rights. That's what the government cares about. Well, Jacobson's passionate defense of her faith is understandable, but her argument dismisses the concerns of former members and misrepresents the state's actions as coercion rather than legitimate effort to uphold human rights. Okay, well, we had enough of that, so the back and forth and the final closing arguments. Violation of moral laws can lead to exclusion. We have examples down to 11-year-old. This is from the state, Gabrielson. And following these exchanges, government attorney Gabrielson took the floor, emphasizing that the case is about balancing different rights. She presented examples where minors, including children as young as 11, have been excluded from Jehovah's Witnesses for violating moral laws. And violation of moral laws can lead to exclusion. We have examples down to an 11-year-old, she says. And she also clarified that the state is not interfering with Jehovah's Witness religious teachings, such as their stance on homosexuality or blood. They should be after the blood one. That's like killing people. That's a bad one. But they aren't. Instead, the government's case revolves around the European Convention on Human Rights, which guarantees children protection from psychological harm. And the state argues that refusing state subsidies and registration is not an infringement on a religious freedom. So not giving them money is not taking away their religious freedom. They can still go out and preach and do everything else they were doing. Now, in the state's view, the decisions have been well enough investigated. You know, the state's just not going to throw money out the window to a religious group that's going to send it to Warwick, to the 11 cult leaders to build Ramapo. They're not going to do that. this money is for the community. It's for the people of Norway. But that money just goes to New York. We all know that. They've investigated it. They're just not saying it in the court. Now, the religious community's practice has provided sufficient basis, she concluded, reinforcing the state's position that the appeal should be rejected. So in response, Risdell delivered a forceful rebuttal, accusing the government of failing to demonstrate how Jehovah's Witnesses violate children's rights or prove that minors are excluded from the religious community, and the state cannot impose additional conditions that must be comfortable to withdraw. Risdell argued, defending the religious group's practice of allowing members to leave voluntarily through written withdrawal. And he also criticized the government's use of European legal precedents, claiming their references were misleading. But he wants to use Massimo and all these other ones, Wow. All the judgments that the state refers to have gone our way. It is a selective reading of the premise from the state, Risdell said. And the state countered this argument with Gabrielson asserting, you cannot deduce much from conclusions alone. I would have liked to go into this more if I had more time. Her colleague Kristen Arvik reinforced the state's position, arguing that Jehovah's Witnesses retain their religious status despite the government's decision. And Jehovah's Witnesses are a religious community and have status as such. The decisions do not constitute a restriction on the exercise of faith, the state says, and as the case nears its conclusion, the court must weigh religious freedom against protecting children's rights. And at the end of the final day, the judge spoke, questioning Risdell on why he required so many assistants, to which he responded that the case was complex and of great importance to JW headquarters in the U.S., and the judge concluded by acknowledging that the case's significance in the large public interest, noting that a ruling is expected within 4 to 6 weeks. And we recognize this case means a lot to many, including those traveling from outside of Norway. And given the volume of evidence, 6,000 pages and 10,000 underlying documents, we will take the necessary time to reach a well-founded decision. A final verdict is expected in coming weeks. And we should note that the practice of Jehovah's Witness of shunning and totally isolating disfellowshipping is not part of the case. What the court will have to decide is whether the total isolation of those who disassociate is a violation of Norwegian law. And if that is the case, can freedom of religion override Norwegian law and the Human Rights Convention? Rolf Furley. Good question. Closing comments from Avoid JW. Today marks the final day of the appeal, a case that is not just about government policy, but about the fundamental rights and protections that every individual, especially children, deserve in a democratic society. And at its core, this case is not an attack on faith. It is not an attempt to silence belief. It is about the boundaries between religious freedom and the duty of the state to protect its citizens from harm. Jehovah's Witnesses argue that their practice express their deeply held beliefs, and they claim that disfellowshipping is a practice that isolates former members, including minors, from their families and communities, that is not harmful but a biblical necessity. But we must ask, at what cost? And they have heard a testimony of children as young as 11 being subjected to exclusion. And we have heard of individuals who, upon questioning the faith, lose their place in the congregation, their family, their support system, and their entire world. And the Jehovah's Witnesses call this religious discipline. We call it psychological violence. And the state has not inferred with their right to worship. They may continue to believe, to gather, and to teach. What we ask is that we refuse funding. Just simply refuse the funding officially and recognize a religious organization that upholds a practice that isolates, shames, and inflicts deep psychological wounds on those who dare to leave. That's what this religion does. And the European Convention on Human Rights protects freedoms of religion, but it also protects individuals from coercion, undue pressure, and harm inflicted under the guise of a religion or the guise of faith. And this is not persecution, this is justice. This is the state drawing a clear line between faith and fundamental rights. And the district court's verdict was correct, and this appeal must be rejected. Norway must not recognize or fund an organization that puts loyalty to doctrine above well-being of its members. Quite simple. Jehovah's Witnesses claim they have not been asked how they feel about the appeal. Well, we have asked. And former members, the ones who were cast out, the ones who lost their family, the ones who suffered, have answered. And their voices cannot be ignored. These former witnesses were strong and stable, expressing their heartfelt stories, their truth. They had to relive and testify on all of their harmful pasts again for this appeal. And we thank all of the friends, inside sources, and considerate advocates who provided information to avoid JW so we could report on it. This case is about the threat of losing everything you love and having to start all over again. And when you're involved in an organization such as Jehovah's Witnesses, that is the price we pay. Well, that brings an end to the trial in Norway, and we'll be waiting for 4 weeks, up to 4 weeks, to see what the judge's final decision is, and we'll report on that as soon as we have it. Well, in the meantime, keep living your life with love, and when you do that, you can't do this. When you live your life with love, you can't really associate with guys like this because you can't trust them. So does that mean you can't really trust a Jehovah's Witness? Well, I would have to say yes to that, because they lie and you can't trust them. And when you meet with elders, they're going to lie to you. You just can't trust them. This court has really opened my eyes to the depth of lying that Jehovah's Witnesses do, circuit overseers do, their wives do, and how they just all support this cult. This cult of 11 men. It's not the Bible. All this stuff, it's not in the Bible. We know that. We've studied the Bible for years and years, many of us. And we're keeping on studying it. And we're finding that we were really fooled, all of us that were in it. And but now that you get out, you look in on this, it's just disgusting. But anyways, thanks again, folks, for hanging in there for this court case all the way through. And this brings an end to the Norway trial. So we'll see you guys on the next video. We'll see you for the verdict, the final announcement that the judges make. Bye for now.